My name's Justin Hicklin. I was one of the original directors of the Gin Guild, so I'm sorry. But I represent the jelly and balloon section here. I've got 20 minutes to talk to you about language. I'm not a doctor of anything. I don't have any mass spectrometry to show you, but I would like to talk to you a bit about language. And the first thing that I'd like to share with you is what the Gin Guild does. And this is something we were quite keen to do, and it just struck me that actually a lot of members of the Gin Guild perhaps don't know what we're here for, don't know what we do. And part of what we do is we're about association, we're about recognising great people who've produced fantastic gins, and we're about promotion. So how do we help you sell your gin? And we're also about education and research. And part of my job is to think about strategically what we should be doing and what should be done by the companies themselves and how we can add value to gin overall. So it struck me that there are not many things that the WSET and the individual companies don't do pretty well in terms of education. But one thing that did strike me was that there seems to be no basic language for gin, which everybody commonly uses. I always like putting a chart up with Charlie McLean on. But Charlie and Dave and myself worked a number of years ago on malt whisky. And we developed something called the Malt Advocates course, probably 20 years ago now. And what both of them taught me was that if you give people simple language, they will use that to tell other people how they've fallen in love with a malt whisky or a gin or a glass of wine or whatever else. And actually, by giving them that single language, you allow them to be able to explore a category that often we who are on the trade side like to overcomplicate what we say because it makes us look clever. Yeah? So if I show you something that's very clever, you think, oh, that Justin Hicklin is terribly clever. But if I give you two words, which a consumer can then take away and go, these are the two things I feel about this gin, that will make them help them to become an advocate. So on a fundamental basis, what I was interested in is how do we give people that basic language to be able to use to describe their gin? And how do we make this something that the Gin Guild, as a non-partisan body in the centre of the world of gin, gives to the industry? So what are the outcomes that we're looking for? Simply for brand owners to have consistent liquid descriptions. So when the brand teams are looking at how they describe gin, they can do it in a simple and coherent way. But also for those large companies, and many of whom are here today, when they're structuring their innovation and they're thinking about areas that they would like to take a brand into, are these appropriate for this big brand? How can we have innovation? I don't know if anybody's here from Tanqueray, but they've kind of blossomed into lots of different areas. Perhaps some of this language will be useful there. Retailers, I mean, particularly in stores, there is at maximum a 5-second window in which you have to explain to somebody what it is that you've got there. At the moment, you have a bunch of very attractive bottles, all called gin. And as somebody coming into the gin category, you don't know what's in the bottle, and this is an attempt to very simply give some people some signposts for that, and encourage retailers to expand their gin category, to expand the number of promotions they do. For barmen, if you've got somebody coming into the bar, how do you navigate them around the category? How do you encourage them into certain areas that they're going to like? How do you say, yes, this tonic goes with this gin, this vermouth goes with this gin, and so on? And for consumers, just to give them that basic language that allows them to be able to navigate. But also, if they don't like a taste or a flavour or think something that's too strong, that they don't buy that bottle of gin so that they're not disappointed. And the last thing we want them to do is to be disappointed by something that's got a very strong flavour. So I call this the Islay paradox. Some people like Islay whiskey, some people hate it. If you buy a bottle of Islay whiskey and you weren't expecting it to taste peaty, you're going to hate it. there are lots of gins that follow that same principle. So what we did, we learned from others. We worked with experts, Charles and Anne, who sit on the board with me, but also David Smith was relentless in his work. Nicholas Cook pushed us around and made us do things. And the chairman here was a great prodder, not allowing any flabby concepts through. So Christopher, thank you for your role in that. So what we have done is learn from other categories. So to kind of illustrate a point, this is a whiskey wheel, and it works because it's been developed by a blender. And a blender will use this sort of whiskey wheel to be able to define exactly what the flavours are that they're working with. If we look at whiskey guides, actually they're great fun, but they're partisan. So if you say this whiskey is more like this and this whiskey is more like that, you then have to choose the whiskey that you're talking about. One of the key things that we wanted to get across was not just flavour, but also mouthfeel. And as many of the distillers in the room will know, the amount of copper you use, the techniques you use will give you a bigger mouthfeel, one than the other, and that's a critical part of some of the premium propositions of gins. And when we looked at wine, such as this basic wine guide, we had to ask ourselves the question, what is basic? Because that seems pretty complicated to me. And then we also had to ask ourselves the question, how do we make something seem drinkable? And again, part of the whole thing of making yourself look clever is that you use various terms to describe botanicals. Whereas actually to a consumer, they have no idea what you're talking about. So how often on the back of bottles do I see Angelica root? Delicious, I'd love some of that. Or, star anise, give me 2 teaspoons of, no idea. So there is a barrier between practicality in describing your botanicals and actually saying to consumers what it's likely to taste like. So I would encourage you to think of the consumer as somebody who doesn't know what star anise is or indeed Angelica root. So we also looked at what had already been done. And there's a lot of work in this sector that's been created, which is very good work. Gin Foundry produced a lovely wheel here, which has a great number of flavours on it. But if you have the time to be able to go through those flavours in a workshop environment, it works. If you have an informed consumer in front of you or barman to be able to explain it, it works. But it doesn't work in 5 seconds at the point of sale. We also looked at using photography. And here, this looks luscious. And again, we're talking about botanical profiles, but they are quite complex. And we looked again at impactful graphics, and I think this is something that Desmond was involved with, which again, you look at and you think, that's quite cool, and that's quite contemporary. But none of them seem to pass the test of what can we do that's useful in a very short space of time. So David started by looking at words, and we put together a selection of words, and we consulted widely, I think with 60 different brand owners, to look at the sort of words that they tended to use when they were describing their product. And this was a very good starting place. However, a number of these words, although technically correct, are not very consumer-facing. Do I want to drink an oily gin? Probably not. But a number of them are consistent, and you see coming up in a number of descriptions from different gin owners. We also played around a bit with graphics. We didn't consider this one for very long, but we thought it was quite fun, and the different bands represent the different flavours. But what we did fall on quite quickly was that there are 6 cardinal aroma territories: herbal, floral, juniper, fruit, citrus, and spice. There was some discussion as to whether juniper is in of itself a flavour territory, but we decided because of its central place within gin, it should have it. We also worked on a number of different logo forms, and the discussion is still going on as to what logo we should use. And we tried a selection of clever infographics, because again, if you're going to introduce something like this, you want to be seen as being clever. However, Nicholas, I think, was the person pulling us back to look at what the consumer's seeing. And if the consumer sees something that's complex, they're not going to engage with it because it's going to be not simple enough for them to be able to interpret quickly. One area that we also looked at was intensity, and I mentioned Mouthfeel before. And we tried to put intensity in the same graphics as we put the flavours. And actually what we found was that it overpowered the rest of it. And also there was an issue for us, which is if you have a beautiful soft gin, do you want to call it soft in this intensity range? Because everybody wants to be masculine and intense and bold and all the rest of it. So we ended up with a sort of issue, almost an existential issue as to whether soft was good and intense was good. So we decided to take intensity out of it. And what we have in the end are three elements to what we're calling the gin note. The first is a selection of words which we think are appropriate to define most gins. And this is intended to define the mouthfeel, and they should be used in a two-word phrase. We have a graphic, and the graphic is a simple bar chart. And the simple bar chart goes juniper, citrus, floral, fruit, herbal, spice, and has a grade on the bottom from 0 to 10. You have 30 points maximum that you can use in this. So it's going to stop people going, oh, well, we're 10 on everything because we're marvellous. So you don't have to use 30, but there are 30 there to use. And what it also allows you to do is to, if you've got a particular flavour that you're keen on, is to reverse it out of one of the bars. So if your gin is all about kumquat or rosemary, you reverse that out of the bar. It does say at the bottom, information provided by the brand owner. And I think it's important to say that we have no intention to become the policeman of the gin industry. We simply want to facilitate brand owners using this graphic to describe their gin in a consistent manner. So you'll be, as members of the Gin Guild, afforded this. You can use it to describe your gins. You can use the methodology. And if there is if a retailer says, I'm sorry, I don't believe I've tasted your gin, it doesn't taste anything like that, you know, call us up and we can set up a little arbitration. But it's a self-policing exercise, which we think will add to what you're doing. And finally, it was very important to us that brands are not just the taste. There needs to be a space for some romance. So there is a space for a 20-word description. So consider this as a gin haiku. Yes? You have 20 words in which to describe your gin. And also, there's a QR code if you want to use it in the bottom right-hand corner. And that will take you through to the Gin Guild website, where you can have the full brand exposition, and that website will then take you onto your own brand website. So what do we have in essence? We have a very simple tool, because we rejected all the complex stuff. And the simple, I don't even know what the blue light means, Ed.
It means you're running short of time.
Okay.
2 minutes to count.
And that's it. So what we've tried to do is produce a very simple tool for brand owners to be able to use consistently across the big brands. We've consulted with the large brand owners who've helped us enormously with this. I think most of them are signed up, if not all of them are signed up to try this, and you'll see this tool used later. So to summarize, brand name, 2 words. you can choose the 2 words. We would prefer you to choose them from the list. If you come back to us and say, our gin is fiery, we might have a conversation about whether fiery is one of the words that we want to use. You then have 20 words to describe your gin, and you can describe it in the bar chart on the left-hand side. You can disassociate, disaggregate all of those different elements. You can use them in smaller or larger amounts. We would encourage you to use them with the flavour guidance call out there. Whether that has Gin Guild on it or not is a discussion that's ongoing. We've looked at it on neck tags, and we've looked at it on shelf markers, but we are consulting, I think, at the moment with people as to how they would use this, whether they would use it on a bottle sticker or in any different ways. I'm going to be sitting on a panel later, so if there are people who want to ask questions on this, please do so. It's meant to be simple. It's not meant to make any of us look clever, but it's meant to communicate with consumers. I'm still on the blue light. There we are. Thank you very much.